When Anne Hathaway appeared by the side of US 441 on a late fall morning, she was almost unrecognizable, barefoot, gaunt, her hair matted and tangled, her clothes torn to shreds, as if she had just crawled out of the dark heart of the forest. The woman had vanished 16 months earlier, in one of the most rugged areas of the Great Smoky Mountains, a place where every search and rescue team believed no one could survive for that long. But the most terrifying thing wasn't her emaciated appearance. The most terrifying thing was the silences in Anne's account. Those pauses that didn't match the phone data, didn't match the search timeline, and seemed to conceal something that had never been spoken aloud. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. On the morning of June 15th, the parking lot in front of the Sugarlands Visitor Center, the familiar starting point for hundreds of visitors every day at Great Smoky Mountains, was covered in a thin layer of mist and soft sunlight when Anne Hathaway, 29 years old, residing in Columbus, Ohio, stepped out of her sedan with a determination she had been nurturing for months. The stressful job and urban life had made Anne want to find a solo journey to test herself, and the Smoky Mountains, with the famous Alum Cave Trail, became the perfect choice. She double-checked her lightweight backpack containing water, food, a jacket, and the map she had just picked up at the information desk, then locked her car at 9 o'clock in the morning. The surveillance camera at the entrance captured the moment Anne left the parking lot at 9:14, blending into the stream of people beginning their hike up to Mount LeConte. The weather that day was rated ideal for hiking: no rain, no high wind warnings, high humidity, but not dangerous, thin clouds drifting over the peaks, and light mist covering the lower forest sections. The rangers on duty that day reported moderate visitor numbers, not too crowded, and dry trail conditions, with no major landslides or large obstacles. According to accounts from other hikers, Anne appeared relaxed and confident, moving at a steady pace, occasionally stopping to observe the scenery, but never veering off the main path leading to Alum Cave. At 10:30, a young couple hiking behind Anne recalled that she seemed familiar with reading the trail signage, didn't ask for directions, and showed no signs of worry or confusion. At 11:02, a group of 3 visitors confirmed they were the last ones to see Anne in the Alum Cave Bluffs area, about 2.3 miles from the starting point. They described her hiking alone, backpack still full, holding a water bottle, and heading toward the steeper section leading to the summit, her stride steady and showing no signs of distress. After that point, there were no more video recordings, photos, or witnesses confirming her presence. According to her original plan, Anne intended to complete the hike in a single day and return to the Sugarlands Visitor Center by around 6 o'clock in the evening to drive back to her hotel in Gatlinburg. However, by 5:30 in the afternoon, her family began calling Anne to check in, but the calls kept going straight to voicemail. Since Anne usually stayed in touch while traveling alone, the prolonged silence raised more concern as the clock passed 7 o'clock in the evening with no response. They kept calling repeatedly until after 9 o'clock, but Anne's phone still had no signal. Finally, at 9:40 in the evening, the family officially called the Great Smoky Mountains park rangers to report her missing, providing a full description of Anne's planned itinerary, and stating that this unusual loss of contact didn't match her habits. From that moment, the missing person file was opened, confirming the disappearance of a visitor last seen at Alum Cave Bluffs just a few hours after leaving the parking lot. Immediately after receiving the missing person report on the evening of June 15th, the Great Smoky Mountains search and rescue team was activated overnight, mobilizing professional rangers, K-9 units, and support equipment, including FLIR thermal imaging aircraft, low-flying drones to scan the forest canopy, and an internal radio system to coordinate the entire operation. The initial search radius was determined based on the average moving speed of a solo hiker on steep terrain, about 1.5 to 2.2 miles per hour, combined with the time Anne was last seen at Alum Cave Bluffs, creating a search area of roughly 4 to 5 miles in every direction from that landmark. On the morning of June 16th, ranger teams split into multiple groups to follow the main trails and side branches, One group continued along Alum Cave Trail toward Mount LeConte. Another checked the Inspiration Point area and intersecting trails at Mount LeConte Junction, while support teams swept both sides of the slopes, areas where people had previously slipped in other missing cases. By noon, one ranger team found a water bottle lying about 1.7 miles off the trail, deep in dense forest, at a location an experienced hiker would be unlikely to reach if still following the intended route. On the second day, the search team found a small handkerchief caught under tree roots, about a quarter mile from the water bottle, and a single sock on a narrow gravel slope not far away. All three items were confirmed to match the type and color of gear Anne had carried, but their locations didn't follow any logical movement path on the terrain. Instead of forming a continuous line, they were scattered in different directions, making it difficult to determine her trajectory. The areas around all three items showed no signs of struggle, no long skid marks, no churned soil, no torn-up forest litter, the usual signals when someone in distress tries to brace or slides. K9 units also couldn't pick up a strong enough scent to track at those spots, adding to the anomaly of how these items appeared. Based on terrain analysis and the finds, the SAR team gave a preliminary assessment. Anne may have left the main trail due to confusion, especially at small unmarked turns, or she may have become exhausted and chosen the wrong direction while trying to return to the main path. There was also the possibility she wandered deeper due to thickening midday fog in higher elevations. Over 11 consecutive days, the search expanded in multiple directions, including large slopes, deep ravines, and lesser-known side trails. Drones and FLIR conducted over 40 wide-area thermal sweeps, but detected no live human heat signatures or any clues leading to Anne's location. By the end of the 11th day, after sweeping all theoretically reachable areas within the time frame of her disappearance, authorities had to suspend the search operation due to no promising results, and moved Anne Hathaway's file to monitoring status, awaiting new leads to resume deployment. 6 months passed after the search was suspended, and Anne Hathaway's file saw no new evidence or witnesses, forcing authorities to officially reclassify the case as a cold case, marking that all proactive investigative avenues had been exhausted without results. Park rangers completed a summary report compiling all data from the initial search phase, detailed maps of searched areas, the off-trail positions of the three found items, specific timelines from Anne's last sighting to rescue deployment, and predicted movement trajectories based on average hiker speed under that day's weather conditions. These maps showed the network of trails, steep zones, side branches, and dense forest surrounding Alum Cave Trail, but no clear movement pattern for Anne could be deduced from the scattered evidence. Unwilling to give up, Anne's family hired a private search team, experienced in mountain forest disappearances. Over 2 months, this group re-swept every area the park rangers had covered, while expanding into rarely visited slopes. They used GPS equipment, handheld thermal detectors, drones, and even accessed high-gradient small crevices, but ultimately found no fabric scraps, footprints, drag marks, or any new signals related to Anne. When the private effort yielded no leads, local media, which had initially covered the disappearance of a young woman at the famous national park heavily, began reducing articles, spacing out updates, and community interest in the case naturally faded over time. Lingering questions about Anne's whereabouts gradually sank into public silence, replaced by newer news and other community events. On the investigative side, Anne's file was archived in the park's cold case system and the regional FBI's, where it would remain until a strong enough factor emerged to reactivate it. Though frozen in practice, rangers and investigators retained the right to reopen the file at any time if new details surfaced, because Anne Hathaway's disappearance was deemed inconsistent with typical accident patterns at Great Smoky Mountains, and the possibility always remained that one small future detail could change the entire case. 16 months after Anne Hathaway's file was placed on the cold case list, and with no active search operations ongoing, around 7 o'clock in the morning on November 14, a local driver, heading south on US 441 through the edge of Cherokee, North Carolina, suddenly spotted a small figure appearing at the roadside. He observed a woman walking barefoot on the cold asphalt, her steps slow and unsteady, arms hanging limply, almost out of control. Noticing the obvious abnormality, the driver slowed down, turned on his hazard lights, and looked closer, realizing the woman seemed disoriented, head bowed, hair matted, and clinging to both sides of her face, body leaning heavily to one side as if unable to support her own weight. When the woman nearly collapsed at the edge of the lane, the driver immediately called 911 and provided a detailed description of the victim's staggering condition, along with the exact location on the local map. Cherokee's emergency response team arrived on scene within minutes and recorded the initial state. The woman was wearing a long-sleeved t-shirt, torn open at the shoulders, long pants covered in dirt, and ripped in multiple places, feet showing numerous cracks, lacerations, and peeling skin from prolonged barefoot walking on rough ground. On-site paramedics measured an abnormally fast heart rate, low blood pressure, signs of dehydration, and mild hypothermia, clear indicators of prolonged exhaustion. When they tried to ask her name, the victim only responded with a few disjointed sounds that didn't form sentences, and immediately lost consciousness as she was assisted onto the stretcher. The rescue team transported her to Cherokee Indian Hospital, where she was taken straight to the emergency evaluation area. Doctors conducted a general examination and quickly noticed a series of injuries, inconsistent with a typical forest lost hiker case. Multiple faded bruises, symmetrically placed on both wrists, identified as marks from prolonged tight binding, hardened calloused areas around the ankles shaped in a way consistent with repeated friction from restraints. A poorly healed fracture on the left arm, indicating a broken bone that received no medical care, and overall skin showing severe malnutrition, suggesting many months without adequate energy intake. Beyond the physical injuries, the medical team also noted the victim's abnormal reactions to the sound of a metal door or heavy boots clacking on the floor, two sounds that caused her to flinch violently and curl up, signs of a conditioned fear reflex tied to prolonged terror. Since the victim could not provide full personal information, the hospital followed standard protocol for unconscious or unable to communicate individuals by taking fingerprints for identification. The federal database comparison returned a complete match with the file of Anne Hathaway, reported missing more than a year earlier in Great Smoky Mountains. As soon as identity was confirmed, Cherokee Indian Hospital notified the FBI Knoxville field office because a long-term missing person reappearing in a condition inconsistent with natural accident scenarios raised clear indicators of a federal crime, especially given the original disappearance occurred along the Tennessee, North Carolina border. Park rangers handling the file were contacted to cross-reference with initial data, confirming the found individual was indeed the visitor who vanished within a radius of just over 20 miles of rugged forest from the current location. At the same time, Anne's family received a call from the FBI informing them that their daughter had been found alive and was receiving emergency medical care. They were instructed to travel to North Carolina immediately to prepare for in-person identification and to provide necessary information to authorities. While the family arranged to travel, the hospital moved the victim to a stable monitoring unit, restricted contact, and continuously recorded vital signs to ensure absolute safety for someone who had just endured a prolonged period of extreme debilitation from an as-yet unknown cause. Once Anne's vital signs stabilized at Cherokee Indian Hospital, the specialist medical team began a detailed forensic medical evaluation and quickly documented a series of signs indicating prolonged malnutrition, body mass well below average for a woman of her age and prior build, significant muscle atrophy, critically reduced body fat percentage, and multiple micronutrient deficiencies, including alarmingly low levels of vitamin D, B12, and iron, showing the body had gone many months without sufficient nutrition. Full-body X-ray results further revealed a major abnormality. The left shoulder bone had been fractured, and had healed on its own with no medical intervention whatsoever, resulting in a slightly misaligned union and non-anatomic healing signs consistent with a high-force injury, followed by improper immobilization throughout recovery. In parallel, the medical team identified circular indentations around the wrists and ankles in the form of long faded grooves that had healed over time, the color no longer red, but the shape still distinct. The size, depth, and symmetry of these marks were assessed as consistent with narrow synthetic fiber rope or cord used for prolonged restraint, and could not result from ordinary forest impacts. Additionally, ligament and joint structure checks showed Anne had experienced restricted movement over an extended period. Ankle ligaments, looser than normal, delayed knee mechanical response, reduced elasticity in soft tissue around the wrists, medical signs that only appear after long periods of subminimal activity or forced maintenance of constrained postures. Summarizing all biological data, the doctors concluded that the pattern of injuries, debilitation, and musculoskeletal condition was completely inconsistent with natural wilderness survival or being lost for a few weeks. Instead, the injury structure indicated she had undergone forced captivity with prolonged movement restriction and control behavior, which medical literature clearly states cannot be explained by ordinary environmental factors in Great Smoky Mountains. After completing the comprehensive medical summary report, the hospital forwarded the entire file, including blood tests, X-ray images, soft tissue injury assessments, and notes on abnormal behavioral reactions, directly to FBI Knoxville and the responsible park rangers, so investigators could proceed with the next phase of analysis based on confirmed medical evidence. Immediately after Cherokee Indian Hospital sent the official medical report, FBI Knoxville assumed jurisdiction per federal guidelines for suspected kidnappings occurring on national park land with potential interstate elements, since Anne was reported missing in Tennessee but reappeared in North Carolina after more than a year with no trace. The investigative initiation process was activated the same day, and the FBI formed a dedicated task force comprising multiple specialized teams. The Behavioral Analysis Unit focused on long-term control and confinement patterns based on medical indicators. The Crime Scene Investigation Team coordinated with park rangers to re-evaluate the entire area where Anne disappeared. The Digital Forensics Group handled analysis of phone data, communication devices, and network pings from the period of her disappearance, and mountain terrain experts familiar with the complex structure of Great Smoky Mountains to model plausible movement routes. The task force collected the complete initial SAR file, including search zone maps, coordinates of the 3 discovered items, ranger daily logs, drone and FLIR activity records, and witness statements compiled on June 15 and 16. The cold case file was pulled from Park Service archives, including the final assessment at the time that there was insufficient evidence to conclude human involvement, and cross-referenced against the victim's current injury state. Based on all gathered data, the FBI began constructing a comprehensive timeline, linking key milestones from Anne's last sighting at Alum Cave Bluffs, the discovery times of the items, the period of no communication data, to her reappearance near Cherokee. This timeline was built in detail by hour, by geographic zone, and under varying movement assumptions to determine the plausibility of each scenario: self-movement, being led, being transported by vehicle, or being held at a fixed location. When cross-referenced with the medical report, the task force reached a preliminary conclusion that no natural survival pattern could account for Anne's injury, malnutrition, and restraint marks. These injuries could only arise through long-term control by one or more individuals, and her reappearance far from the initial disappearance site reinforced the likelihood that the victim was moved across state lines shortly after vanishing. From this assessment, the FBI determined the case was highly likely to involve organized criminal behavior, possibly utilizing a holding facility, isolated from tourist trails, and extending over many months before the victim managed to escape. When Anne's health stabilized to the point she could communicate, the task force began collecting preliminary statements, focusing on events immediately before and after her disappearance on Alum Cave Trail. In the first interview, Anne described that she had gotten lost from the main trail, then tried to survive by following streams, finding temporary shelter, and moving irregularly out of fear of encountering wildlife or getting trapped in fog, while insisting no one else appeared during her journey. When investigators pressed for more detail, Anne only repeated similar points and could not provide specific information about locations, landmarks, survival processes, or reasons for her prolonged physical decline, sharply contrasting with the medical file, since the injuries on her body did not reflect a scenario of being lost for days or natural survival, but clearly showed a pattern of long-term restricted movement, extended malnutrition, and untreated past trauma. Recognizing this striking discrepancy, the FBI brought in a psychologist to evaluate Anne's reactions during statement giving, and the expert clearly identified signs of conditioned compliance, a reflex developed in victims of long-term control or captivity, leading to avoidance or unwillingness to describe the truth when facing uniformed or authoritative figures out of fear of punishment from the previous controller. Investigators also noted that Anne frequently looked down or avoided eye contact whenever questioned about the disappearance period, behavior consistent with avoidance patterns documented in victims of coercive behavioral control. After comparing the initial statements in full with physical evidence, medical data, and the investigative timeline, the task force unanimously concluded that Anne's account did not match any existing survival model and clearly did not accurately reflect what occurred during the 16 months of no contact. Therefore, they decided to advance the case to an in-depth information extraction phase, employing specialized protocols for victims potentially subjected to long-term behavioral control, in order to reconstruct memory, resolve contradictions, and gradually clarify events that may have been concealed in the initial statements. Parallel with collecting Anne's preliminary statements, the FBI's digital forensics team began retrieving metadata related to her phone, using carrier data to analyze the full activity history, including device power on off times, cell tower pings, background activity logs, and recorded system connections right before and during the period of her disappearance. The first report showed that the device's GPS had been manually turned off just 30 minutes after Anne left the last camera view at Sugarland's Visitor Center, an entirely unusual action, because most hikers keep GPS on for navigation assistance, especially in an area with many intersecting trails. The fact that GPS was disabled right after Anne entered the woods and lost contact led the FBI to regard this as intentional human intervention rather than a technical glitch. When the forensics team reconstructed the ping connection sequence from the day Anne vanished, they discovered one major anomaly. Throughout the first 5 months, Anne's phone consistently pinged from the Greenbrier area, a deep, rugged forested region, with no marked trails, and virtually no chance of natural survival without full gear. The repeated pings appearing multiple times in the exact same small area on the map indicated the device had barely moved any significant distance over a long period, completely contradicting her statement that she had been continuously moving to find a way to survive. Beyond the unusual ping sequence, digital forensics also uncovered a photo taken with the phone's rear camera roughly 3 weeks after Anne disappeared. The image captured only a dark patch with artificial yellow light in the upper corner, containing no people or clear scenery. But this type of light was inconsistent with any natural forest light source. This was strong evidence that Anne's phone had been turned on and used in a constructed space, or one with man-made lighting. The forensics team continued checking battery logs and found the phone was powered back on multiple times in regular cycles, each instance spaced 10 to 20 days apart, resembling someone checking whether the device still had battery or was still operational, rather than a victim desperately trying to send distress signals. These on-off cycles formed an organized pattern, showing the phone was not left in a natural environment or abandoned, but deliberately accessed over an extended period. Summarizing all the data: manually disabled GPS, fixed pings for months in an area impossible for natural survival, a photo taken in a space with artificial light, and cyclic power-on patterns. The digital forensics team concluded unequivocally that Anne's device had been in a human-controlled environment where its location could be concealed, and the device itself accessed at regular intervals, completely ruling out the possibility that Anne had simply gotten lost or survived independently in the wilderness during her disappearance. After the digital forensics team completed their report and presented the phone-related data points to Anne in detail, including the manual GPS shutdown within 30 minutes of leaving the last camera point, months-long fixed pings in the Greenbrier region, battery log checks showing regular cyclic power-ons, and the discovery of a photo taken in a dark environment with artificial light, her efforts to maintain the got-lost narrative began to collapse. This forensic information entirely eliminated the possibility that she had simply survived in the forest or moved randomly over many months, and under the pressure of objective evidence, Anne for the first time admitted that a man had appeared in her journey on the day she disappeared. This change in her statement came slowly and cautiously, but it was enough for the task force to recognize that a human element not only existed, but played a direct role in Anne vanishing from Alum Cave Trail without leaving any continuous trace on the terrain. Investigators noted that Anne reacted strongly when digital forensics mentioned the artificial light in the photo. This detail seemed to trigger a suppressed memory, and it was at that exact moment she admitted the presence of a male subject who had been following her at Alum Cave Bluffs. As soon as this admission came out, the FBI shifted to a structured information extraction strategy, requiring Anne to provide statements in chronological order rather than disjointed memory fragments. The goal of sequencing the events was to reconstruct a complete timeline, combining her statements, digital forensics data, and initial SAR records to precisely determine the timing, location, and progression of milestones that her prior statements had left unclear. Rebuilding the timeline was decisive because it allowed the task force to cross-check each detail against objective data: the GPS shutdown time, prolonged ping locations in Greenbrier, periods when the device was cyclically powered on, as well as the long gaps with no communication signals during the early months. When the FBI asked Anne to clearly identify the location of her first encounter with the man, she pointed to the Alum Cave Bluffs area, matching the time when the last witnesses saw her at 11:02 in the morning on the day of the disappearance. This was a critical detail because it placed the contact between Anne and the subject right before her device's GPS was turned off, consistent with intervention by another person, rather than self-disablement due to error or forgetfulness by the victim. To support the detailed information extraction phase, the FBI prepared an in-depth mapping system of the entire Alum Cave Trail area and surrounding regions. These maps were not ordinary tourist maps, but included high-resolution topographic maps, slope maps, small stream flow maps, seasonal forest cover distribution maps, park rangers' maps of unmarked side paths, and satellite imagery taken as close as possible to Anne's disappearance date. The objective was to provide Anne with non-coercive memory-triggering tools to help her re-identify stopping points, turns, or environmental sounds she recalled. Using detailed maps also allowed the task force to immediately cross-reference Anne's statements against real terrain, preventing memory vagueness or distortion due to the long time lapse. As this process began, the FBI carefully recorded every detail Anne described about the surrounding environment at the time she encountered the male subject: terrain type, distance to cliffs, air humidity, trail steepness, number of passers-by at that moment. All were layered onto digital maps, laying the groundwork for broader analysis in subsequent steps. Anne's admission that a man appeared at the same time she was last seen by witnesses, combined with digital forensics proving deliberate device control, prompted the task force to move the case into the detailed statement phase, a crucial step toward beginning to unravel the full sequence of events that had been concealed for more than 16 months. Entering the detailed information extraction phase, Anne was asked to recount the entire sequence of events on the morning of June 15 in continuous order, starting from when she left Alum Cave Bluffs after being seen by the last group of visitors. At this point, she stated that the male subject first appeared by walking along the main trail like an ordinary hiker, maintaining just enough distance to avoid drawing attention while remaining within her line of sight. Anne described that at first she thought he was simply another hiker on the same route, since he wore appropriate hiking attire, carried a medium-sized backpack, and moved at a steady pace. However, about 10 to 15 minutes after leaving the bluffs area, the man began closing the gap and initiated conversation with short questions about the route to Mount LeConte. When Anne gave brief answers and kept walking, the subject stepped up alongside her and pointed to a small side path off the main trail, saying there was a shortcut segment that could get them there faster. This turn was not marked on any official signage, which made Anne hesitate, but she said at the time she believed the man might be a local or someone who had hiked the trail many times. After a few minutes of brief exchange, and in an unguarded frame of mind, Anne followed in the direction he indicated. That was the unmarked path not present on the map she had reviewed at Sugarland's visitor center. Based on Anne's estimated average moving speed from the camera position and last witness sighting, the task force determined that this diversion event occurred around 11:20 to 11:30 in the morning, very close to the time her GPS was manually disabled according to digital forensics data. Anne stated that just a few minutes after entering the new side path, the terrain quickly changed, the trail narrowed, trees grew denser, and the ground had many protruding roots, making her feel uncertain about the direction. When she turned back to look at the man for confirmation, she saw he had closed to a very short distance, behavior opposite to his initial friendliness. Just a few steps later, as Anne began asking if they were going the right way, the subject suddenly approached from behind, and acted in a manner she described as quick and precise, a hard strike to the nape of her neck that completely knocked her off balance and caused immediate unconsciousness. Analyzing Anne's description, the task force identified this as a deliberate, pre-planned attack pattern, since a blow to the nape is a sensitive spot often used to incapacitate a victim silently, and the strike left no open wound, but was forceful enough to cause temporary loss of consciousness. The event of Anne being subdued also perfectly matched the phone data, GPS disabled around 30 minutes after she was last seen at Alum Cave Bluffs, aligning with the time she described being led onto the unofficial path and attacked from behind. Furthermore, the fact that the found items were scattered off any logical movement path during the initial search further supported the hypothesis that Anne no longer controlled her own direction after being subdued. Thus, Anne's detailed statement about how the subject approached, lured, and attacked formed a logical chain of events, allowing the task force to pinpoint the exact time, place, and method of the abduction, while directly cross-referencing signal loss data and witness reports to confirm that the criminal act was intentional, premeditated, and completely inconsistent with any natural accident scenario on the Alum Cave Trail. When asked to describe in detail the place she was taken to after the blow to the nape of her neck, Anne stated that when she regained consciousness, she was lying in a small cabin with extremely limited light, only a single weak yellow bulb hanging high on the ceiling, and all windows completely covered with thick wooden panels, so no natural light could get in at all. The cabin had a double lock system, including a mechanical steel bolt lock and an external lock. She only heard the metal clank each time the subject entered or exited, but never saw directly. She described that right from the first days of captivity, the most distinctive sound she heard was the steady hum of a small generator placed outside the cabin, the noise echoing through the dry wooden walls, indicating the place was not connected to the public power grid. The generator ran steadily for most of the night, sometimes shut off for a few hours in the morning, creating a repeating rhythm that Anne remembered very clearly, and this became an important clue for the task force that the cabin had independent power and was almost certainly located outside any area with public utilities. When describing the interior, Anne said the cabin was very basic, but appeared deliberately arranged: a narrow metal bed with a thin mattress placed against the wall, narrow synthetic fiber ropes already tied to the two bed legs, and a single steel door leading outside, completely out of place with the rest of the cabin, which used only wooden walls. She clearly recalled the cold feeling when touching the steel door handle, showing it was the only component not handmade. This detail was especially significant because it suggested the cabin had been built or modified by someone from an old structure, but fitted with a steel door to ensure secure confinement. In addition, Anne noted the cabin had a strong smell of machine oil, like poorly maintained mechanical parts or equipment, and the space was always stuffy due to poor ventilation, only one small vent high out of reach, making the cabin stifling hot in summer and freezing cold in winter. These elements indicated the cabin's rudimentary design, not built to residential standards, but as a makeshift shelter, likely deep in the forest in a hard-to-reach area. When asked about the surrounding terrain, Anne only remembered that every time the subject opened the cabin door, she briefly heard wind whistling and leaves rustling very close by, with no engine sounds at all, leading her to believe the cabin was in a place accessible only by narrow footpaths or on foot, not by truck or car. Anne's observations of forest smells, humidity, and insect sounds further reinforced the hypothesis that the cabin was built in dense deep woods with thick vegetation and no presence of tourist trails. Summarizing Anne's statements, the task force concluded that the structure where she was held fit the pattern of an organized off-grid hideout: generator power, double-locked steel door, pre-prepared restraint ropes, machine oil smell, indicating mechanical equipment maintenance, and a cabin location deep in the forest, with no motorized access. This was consistent with a confinement facility designed to conceal human presence for extended periods and remain outside the range of initial search teams, drones, or FLIR deployed in the early phase of the case. Moving to the description of confinement behavior, Anne stated that throughout her time in the cabin, her eating schedule was strictly controlled at a minimal level, only one meal per day, mostly canned food, dry crackers, or thin soup, sometimes reduced if she was deemed uncooperative by the subject's judgment. This meager calorie intake quickly caused physical decline, and was the direct cause of the prolonged malnutrition documented in the medical report. In addition to food control, the subject forced Anne to perform compulsory tasks on a fixed schedule. Every morning she was taken outside the cabin, under close supervision, and required to chop firewood, gather rotten wood, clear small paths around the cabin, repair leaky roof or wall sections, or assist with minor cultivation like watering vegetable barrels, weeding, or carrying water from a nearby stream up to the cabin. These tasks not only caused exhaustion, but also accumulated physical damage to her body, especially the left shoulder and knee joints, later injuries that perfectly matched the hospital's X-rays and ligament assessments. Anne described that her sleep time was also severely restricted. The subject frequently turned on the cabin light, or made noises at random times during the night, to prevent her from maintaining deep sleep. During the day the cabin was almost completely dark, due to blocked natural light, while at night, artificial light was reduced to keep the cabin dim, completely disrupting her circadian rhythm, and keeping her in a constant state of fatigue and loss of time perception. When cross-referencing this pattern with the actual injuries on Anne's body, loose ligaments from forced labor without adequate nutrition, untreated self-healed left shoulder, calluses on wrists and ankles from restraints, and overall debilitation, the task force observed perfect alignment between her statements and medical evidence. Beyond the cabin description, Anne said the surrounding area was very dense forest, with tree canopies so closed that sunlight barely reached the cabin. Behind the cabin was a small stream with cold water flowing over rock ledges and dropping into a deep ravine, making the sound echo clearly at night. The terrain around the cabin had steep slopes, large protruding roots, and slippery rocks, indicating an infrequently traversed area. This explained why drones and FLIR in the initial search phase detected no signals, and why the cabin could exist undetected outside rescue team reach. Summarizing statements on restricted diet, forced labor schedule, circadian rhythm disruption, and surrounding terrain description, investigators concluded that Anne had been subjected to a prolonged systematic forced labor regime, aimed at physical and psychological control, fully consistent with documented injury patterns, and ruling out any possibility of natural wilderness survival, as in her initial statements. When asked to describe the psychological control tactics the subject used throughout her captivity, Anne stated that he frequently applied systematic punishment methods to break her will and resistance. The most common was locking her in complete darkness with no light source at all, even turning off the single yellow bulb, and covering every light crack with thick cloth. This punishment could last many hours, sometimes a full day, causing disorientation and heightened fear. Another form of punishment was water restriction. Whenever she disobeyed orders, or asked too much about release, the subject would provide only a tiny amount of water, or delay it, keeping Anne in constant thirst and debilitation, which doctors noted through prolonged dehydration indicators upon hospital admission. Beyond direct punishment, the subject deliberately shattered Anne's sense of time by providing no information about dates, irregularly changing meal and sleep times. Sometimes he fed her breakfast at midnight, or woke her in the afternoon, and made her perform labor as if it were morning. This intentional disruption of time linkage gradually eroded her ability to perceive day-night cycles, severely undermining the psychological anchors that help people maintain will and agency. One of the most repeatedly described psychological manipulation tactics Anne mentioned was an order the subject repeated many times throughout captivity. "Do not talk to anyone in uniform." He made her repeat this order like a ritual, sometimes at the start of the day, sometimes after forced labor sessions, and certainly whenever he felt she was not obedient enough. Repeating this command created a form of conditioning, causing Anne to reflexively avoid or go silent when facing authority figures, a behavior FBI psychologists noted immediately upon her discovery, when she continuously averted her eyes from hospital staff and reduced speech whenever seeing rescue or police uniforms. When cross-referencing descriptions of these psychological control methods with Anne's actual behavior, upon return, curling up at loud footsteps, avoiding eye contact, defensive reactions to uniforms, loss of time sense, heightened anxiety, when hospital doors closed, psychologists observed complete alignment between her conduct and the long-term control victim pattern from the techniques she described. The task force concluded that the goal of these manipulative behaviors was not only to maintain absolute physical control, but also to erode resistance, erase confidence, and prevent Anne from giving clear or complete statements if she escaped. This explained why in her initial statements, Anne almost never mentioned the subject and tried to maintain the "got lost" story, a response shaped by being forced to repeat the order in prolonged isolation. When asked to describe her escape attempts throughout the captivity, Anne stated that the first time she tried to untie the ropes happened just a few days after waking up in the cabin, while the subject went to the back area to start the generator. She tried twisting her wrist to loosen the synthetic fiber ropes, using the edge of the metal bed to rub against the knot, but due to lack of strength, and the ropes being tied with a double knot, it took her many minutes to loosen them even partially. When she moved to the door to try the bolt, she didn't realize it had a double lock from the outside. The sound of the door moving alerted the subject immediately, leading to punishment by locking her in complete darkness for many hours. Further reinforcing her fear and breaking her early resistance, the second attempt occurred a few weeks later, when Anne was taken outside the cabin to gather wood near the small stream behind it. She noticed the subject was focused on repairing the cabin roof, and decided to run straight down the slope toward the stream in hopes of finding an escape route along the water. However, the slippery steep slope and thick vegetation slowed her movement, and the subject quickly caught up, grabbed her tightly at the stream's edge, before dragging her back to the cabin. The consequence was water restriction for more than a day, and being forced back to labor earlier than usual, creating a prolonged debilitation chain later confirmed by medical records. The third escape attempt was the most significant event, as it directly caused the left shoulder injury documented in hospital X-rays. Anne recounted that while cleaning near an old wooden storage cabinet, she spotted a sharp tool resembling a rope-cutting blade that had fallen behind a wooden crate, and she decided to grab it when the subject turned his back. But as she reached, her foot slipped on the uneven ground, causing her entire body weight to slam into her left shoulder as she fell sideways, producing intense pain that left her unable to stand. The subject heard the noise, rushed in, snatched the tool back, and dragged her into the cabin, leaving her motionless for many hours without medical care. This detail perfectly matched the X-ray report showing a fractured left shoulder that had self-healed misaligned after many months without treatment. Anne also clearly described the subject's reactions after each escape attempt, initially punishment by dark confinement, then shifting to reduced water rations and increased forced labor. Each time he repeated the command, "Do not talk to anyone in uniform," reinforcing the conditioning mechanism and making her increasingly afraid to make requests or show resistance. These descriptions showed the subject closely monitored every action and had experience controlling victims. While the cabin was designed with multiple locks, a steel door, and a single exit, making escape from the structure nearly impossible without an unexpected factor. When the task force reorganized the timeline based on Anne's statements and cross-referenced it with injury progression, they clearly identified the 3 escape attempts corresponding to body marks: rope indentations on wrists and ankles from the first attempt, dehydration and exhaustion from the second, and left shoulder injury from the third, forming a fully logical sequence consistent with medical records and her physical state upon discovery. When recounting the final and successful escape, Anne stated the opportunity only arose when the perpetrator was injured during heavy labor. Specifically, one afternoon, he tried to drag a rotten tree trunk off the path behind the cabin, but slipped, slamming his knee hard into rock. From that point, he moved with difficulty and significantly reduced continuous supervision. To manage pain, the perpetrator began using high-dose painkillers, stored in a wooden box next to the tool cabinet. Anne saw him swallow multiple pills at once over several consecutive days, leading to prolonged drowsiness and unusually deep sleep at night. One evening, as he lay motionless on a folding bed near the steel door, Anne noticed the metal keyring usually attached to his shoelaces, mostly protruding over the bed edge, something that had never happened before, because he always kept the keys in his pocket. She waited until his snoring indicated deep sleep from the strong medication, then quietly approached, cupped her hand around the shoelace, and slowly pulled the keys free from the hook in a breath-holding careful motion to avoid any sound, knowing even a small twitch could wake him. Once she had the keys, she returned to the cabin door, taking many minutes in the dark to try each one, finally unlocking both, the steel bolt and the external padlock that had always prevented escape before. Anne described the moment of pushing the door open as absolute silence, but uncertainty whether I could survive, because outside was pitch black, and the forest so dense no path was visible. She decided to follow the most familiar sound, the small stream behind the cabin she had heard for many months. She followed the stream northward, where the terrain was flatter and the flowing water allowed orientation without light. The journey was extremely slow because she moved barefoot with a debilitated body. Along the way, Anne noticed 2 small wooden bridges over the stream, signs that the area wasn't entirely wild, but possibly near an old maintenance trail or Forest Service path. She crossed both bridges and continued following the stream toward Kephart Shelter, an area she had seen on maps at the visitor center before disappearing. Though unsure if she was heading correctly, she still used the sloping terrain and water sound to avoid circling back around the cabin. After many hours of near-unconscious walking, she reached a wider trail that investigators later identified as a connecting segment toward Newfound Gap Road. When she began hearing distant vehicle sounds, Anne knew she had escaped the completely isolated area where the cabin was built. She continued descending the slope, eventually reaching a side road near Newfound Gap Road, then walked many more miles south, until exhaustion forced her to follow the edge of US 441, where the driver spotted her, a point perfectly matching the reappearance data. Immediately after Anne detailed her escape route, rangers coordinated with the FBI to survey the terrain point by point as she described, starting from the Kephart Shelter area and tracing the stream northward to locate the 2 wooden bridges she mentioned. After many hours of searching, they found exactly 2 old wooden bridges, not marked on official hiking maps, but remaining as remnants of an abandoned forest maintenance route from years earlier, significantly matching Anne's description. When examining the area around the first bridge, rangers noted a very faint footprint in damp soil, shallow depth with no clear tread pattern, consistent with someone walking barefoot or in socks while exhausted. Nearby were several low-hanging broken branches, suggesting the person may have grabbed them for balance, along with displaced leaf patches forming a light drag path, consistent with Anne moving in debilitated condition after escaping the cabin. The task force continued following the stream, noting many natural stopping points where water slowed and soil softened, ideal spots for movement traces, and at one such location, they found small parallel indentations resembling marks from someone sitting to rest or kneeling to drink. All these traces were not clear enough for precise timing, but combined to form a logical movement path compatible with Anne's account of her nighttime direction. When cross-referencing coordinates from the survey route with Anne's phone ping data during her disappearance, the digital forensics team confirmed significant overlap. The 5-month prolonged ping area in Greenbrier lay just east of the stream. Anne used to escape, creating an intersection zone, indicating the cabin was highly likely located in dense forest between two small watersheds, where steep terrain and thick canopy made FLIR and drone penetration difficult during initial searches. To aid in pinpointing the cabin range, the investigation team collected soil samples from multiple points along the stream, especially locations with footprints or leaf displacement, and gathered small fiber samples clinging to broken branches or brush for future comparison with synthetic fibers. If the cabin is located, soil analysis will help identify regional soil characteristics, narrowing areas with similar properties within the ping radius. After compiling all escape route data, Rangers and FBI mapped a containment zone for possible cabin locations based on factors matching slope, estimated distance Anne could cover overnight, correlation with stream and wooden bridges, sufficient forest density to hide a built structure, and alignment with phone ping area. This radius was determined to be approximately 1.5 to 2.3 miles from the main stream, forming a deep, hard-to-access forest zone, fully consistent with Anne's description and physical evidence of her confinement site. From the containment zone identified during the escape route survey, the ranger team and FBI deployed a grid-pattern search, taking nearly 2 days to sweep every cluster of the densest vegetation. By noon on the third day, they discovered an anomalous structure, camouflaged with forest netting and a thick layer of dry leaves, blending almost perfectly into the surrounding brush and trees. Upon closer approach, investigators confirmed this was a handmade cabin. Wooden planks nailed with mismatched sizes, a roof covered in old corrugated metal, and camouflage netting, a roughly but sturdily installed steel door, accompanied by the exact double lock system Anne had described. Next to the main door sat an old model mini Yamaha generator on a wooden frame, still leaving oil drips on the ground. Clear evidence the structure operated independently of the power grid and relied entirely on mechanical energy. Inside the cabin, the forensics team noted a narrow metal bed placed against the east wall, with several loops of synthetic fiber rope still remaining on it, one of which matched in size the indentations recorded on Anne's wrists at the hospital. In the corner of the room, they found a homemade metal ankle shackle, sturdy enough to restrict movement, but not an industrial product, indicating the perpetrator had forged or modified it from scrap materials. On wooden shelves along the wall were several partially used MRE meals ready-to-eat containers, the type commonly used in off-grid living or by isolated individuals, adding another detail consistent with the lifestyle Anne described. During evidence collection, the forensics team found numerous long hairs caught under the metal bed mattress, along with small black fiber fragments clinging to the ankle shackle, all sealed for DNA analysis and comparison with Anne's hair samples taken at the hospital. After collecting all evidence, investigators directly cross-referenced every detail in the cabin with Anne's statements: the double-locked steel door, metal bed, synthetic restraint ropes, mini generator, machine oil smell, poor ventilation space. Everything matched her prior description perfectly, reinforcing the accuracy of her account and confirming this cabin was indeed the confinement site throughout her disappearance. The crime scene technicians continued scanning the cabin for fingerprints and obtained a clear set on the steel door, generator, and shelf edges. These prints were then compared against federal databases and matched an individual with a criminal record from many years earlier, a critical lead for investigators in identifying the perpetrator. Evaluating the entire structure, the forensics team concluded the cabin had been hand-built using forest materials combined with some homemade metal components, bearing no characteristics of civilian construction or official forest infrastructure. This aligned with the hypothesis that the perpetrator had lived off-grid for a long time, possessed deep terrain knowledge, the ability to build secret shelters, and maintained operations without detection by rangers or tourists, creating ideal conditions for long-term victim confinement without leaving traces. The fingerprint analysis from the steel door, generator, and wooden shelves in the cabin quickly identified the suspect, Edward Malloy, 44 years old, an individual previously residing off-grid in multiple mountainous forest areas of eastern Tennessee and western North Carolina. Malloy's federal database record contained no violent crimes, but was thick with economically motivated offenses, financial fraud, forging identification documents, creating unauthorized bank accounts, and using others' identities to evade taxes. These behaviors demonstrated Malloy's skills in manipulating personal information and running covert criminal operations while avoiding urban environments and living isolated in the woods for years, consistent with the handmade cabin construction and off-grid lifestyle noted by the forensics team. Analyzing motive, the task force concluded that the abduction of Anne was not impulsive or emotional, but carefully calculated with two clear objectives. First, forced labor to sustain Malloy's off-grid setup, including cabin repairs, firewood chopping, wood gathering, small-scale cultivation, and maintenance tasks he could no longer handle alone after shifting to an isolated lifestyle. Second, exploiting the victim's identity for new financial fraud schemes. Anne was an ideal target, as a solo traveler, with no local connections. Once missing in the wilderness, her identity became unclaimed in the perpetrator's eyes, creating an opportunity for Malloy to seize her personal information for opening fake accounts or other illegal financial activities. Investigators confirmed this by comparing timelines. Shortly after Anne's disappearance, attempts were made to register online services using her information, though unsuccessful due to document verification requirements, consistent with identity exploitation efforts. Linking the cabin to Malloy's criminal history showed the structure served not just as a residence, but as an operational base for his criminal model. No oversight, no traceable transactions, easy victim concealment, and sufficient isolation to evade routine ranger checks. The cabin also fit Malloy's documented off-grid lifestyle over many years, building temporary structures, self-sufficiency, moving away from communities, and avoiding real identity transactions. Compiling all data from the cabin, Anne's statements, Malloy's financial records, and forensic traces, the FBI drafted a complete federal indictment package to prepare an arrest warrant, including charges of interstate kidnapping, forced labor, unlawful confinement, aggravated assault, and identity theft for criminal purposes. With strong physical evidence and consistent testimony, the arrest package was deemed highly persuasive and fully met federal prosecution criteria. Immediately after the cabin was processed, and Edward Malloy's identity confirmed, the task force assessed that he had likely detected signs of intrusion from a distance, through displaced camouflage netting, new footprints, or the generator suddenly stopping, and fled the area before authorities arrived. Based on knowledge of Malloy's off-grid habits, the FBI determined he would avoid main roads or service stations, and exit via small forest paths to evade detection. Accordingly, FBI Knoxville coordinated with Great Smoky Mountains Rangers to establish a pursuit radius based on typical movement speed for someone carrying a heavy backpack, combined with terrain slopes and unofficial trail networks in the Greenbrier, Cosby area. The sweep zone covered 12 to 16 square miles, prioritizing dense canopy coverage, consistent with the subject's hiding behavior. Flyer drones were deployed the very first night, scanning the entire area along stream branches and forest slopes, the same features that had previously hindered cabin detection, and at dawn the next day, one drone detected an anomalous heat signature near Cosby Campground, a slowly moving heat point matching the size of a person carrying heavy gear, heading off the main trail. This signal was immediately flagged as a high-probability target, and the FBI Rapid Response Team approached from 3 directions to prevent Malloy from escaping down the eastern slope. As agents neared the drone-reported coordinates, they found Malloy sitting on a tree stump, backpack at his feet, showing signs of exhaustion from his prior knee injury. Though he attempted to stand and flee upon seeing the team, the narrow terrain and presence of multiple experienced forest rangers limited him to only a few meters before he was safely subdued. On-site backpack inspection revealed critical items supporting off-grid life and criminal activity, set of fake IDs with his photo, but someone else's personal information, 2 bank cards in Anne Hathaway's name, activated after her disappearance, and a USB drive containing encrypted files, later identified by forensics as personal documents, login credentials, and data prepared for financial fraud. Also present was a handwritten notebook detailing labor schedules, cabin repair plans, and lists of forest-sourced items, demonstrating his forced labor regime against Anne was systematic and long-term. All evidence was sealed by the FBI at the scene before transport to the lab, preserving chain of custody for prosecution. Malloy was handcuffed and transferred to Knox County Detention Facility, pending interrogation, marking a major turning point in the investigation, as the perpetrator responsible for over a year of disappearance and forced confinement was finally captured with incriminating evidence. During the federal prosecution phase, Edward Malloy was charged under the 5 most serious categories in the U.S. justice system: interstate kidnapping, forced labor, identity trafficking and exploitation, aggravated assault, causing serious injury, and attempted murder. Each carried severe sentencing guidelines, especially given the victim's confinement exceeding 16 months. Federal prosecutors presented the evidence in logical structure. First, digital forensics proving Anne's phone was controlled, GPS manually disabled, device pinging for months in Greenbrier, and regular cyclic power on/off patterns. Next, physical evidence from the cabin, including restraint ropes, ankle shackle, metal bed, mini generator, MRE containers, and hair samples. Then the reconstructed confinement timeline from statements, medical records, and GPS data. Finally, items recovered from Malloy's backpack at arrest, fake IDs, Anne's bank cards, labor notebook, and data USB, all demonstrated a systematic premeditated pattern, consistent with prolonged forced labor. When Anne testified in court, her account aligned perfectly with all physical evidence: cabin location, double lock structure, confinement methods, forced labor schedule, escape attempts, left shoulder injury, rope indentations, and machine oil smell in the cabin. Every detail she presented matched collected data, bolstering the credibility of her testimony. Medical experts, digital technicians, rangers, and field investigators successively testified, confirming full consistency between objective data and the victim's narrative, eliminating any defense arguments from Malloy. After nearly 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a unanimous verdict: Edward Malloy guilty on all charges, including kidnapping, forced labor, identity trafficking, aggravated assault, and attempted murder, emphasizing that the cruelty and extended duration precluded any mitigation. At sentencing, the federal judge declared this one of the most serious kidnapping confinement cases ever in federal wilderness territory, with Malloy's conduct reflecting the highest level of calculation, control, and inhumanity. The court therefore imposed life imprisonment without parole, meaning Malloy would remain in federal prison for life with no possibility of reduction or release. Once the sentence was read, the case file was closed per procedure and moved to execution phase, marking the legal conclusion of a kidnapping lasting over a year and affirming maximum criminal accountability for the responsible party. After the case closed, and Malloy received life without parole, Anne entered a prolonged recovery phase under intensive psychological therapy, as more than 16 months of captivity left lasting scars not erasable by time alone. She struggled with deep sleep, reacted strongly to heavy footsteps or closing doors, and took many months to rebuild a sense of safety in enclosed spaces. Psychologists employed controlled exposure therapy, combined with memory processing and conditioned reflex management, to gradually restore her independent living ability. Her family, determined to turn pain into action, established a foundation supporting victims of kidnapping and forced labor, providing resources for survivors in similar cases, including psychological therapy, legal aid, and community reintegration guidance. The foundation quickly gained local community and federal organization support for its practicality and social impact. For the Park Service, the case prompted a full review of visitor warning procedures and high-risk trails. New warning signs were added at Alum Cave Trail and major paths in Great Smoky Mountains, with updated maps of unofficial turns, alerts about stranger risks in deep forest areas, and recommendations for group hiking over solo travel. Park rangers also expanded training on identifying unauthorized off-grid activity signs to detect similar illegal structures, like Malloy's cabin early. On the FBI side, analysis of the USB and financial evidence seized from Malloy's backpack continued to determine if he had prior victims or prepared fake identities for future targets. Some encrypted files showed searches for personal information on multiple solo female travelers, prompting a broader federal review. The case also had significant impact on the local community and tourism around Great Smoky Mountains. Many residents voiced concerns about hidden crime risks in deep forest areas, once considered safe, while visitors showed increased interest in personal security measures, boosting demand for tracking devices, safety apps, and guided services. However, with Park Service improvements and Malloy's capture, the area gradually regained stability, and the case became a powerful reminder of the need for vigilance, thorough preparation, and close itinerary monitoring when exploring vast natural regions. Anne Hathaway's story is not just a survival journey from a 16-month kidnapping, but a profound warning to modern American society, a nation with strong security systems and advanced technology, yet still containing gaps where people can vanish without trace amid vast wilderness. From Anne being approached right at Alum Cave Bluffs, one of Great Smoky Mountains' busiest trails, to Malloy living off-grid undetected for years, the story underscores that personal safety always requires proactive individual effort, even in seemingly safest environments. The fact that Anne's GPS was manually disabled just 30 minutes after leaving the last camera, or her phone pinged for 5 months in Greenbrier without anyone knowing, reminds us that technology only helps when used actively. Sharing real-time location while solo traveling, informing family of planned itineraries, and always maintaining backup plans in mountainous forest areas. At the same time, the FBI's tracing along the stream, old wooden bridges, and camouflaged deep forest cabins shows modern criminals are no longer confined to urban spaces. They can move, hide, and operate in ways hard for authorities to detect without community vigilance. Most importantly, is the victim's resilience. And despite psychological control through commands like "do not talk to anyone in uniform," still seized the opportunity to escape when the perpetrator let his guard down. This reminds us of the value of will, faith in even the smallest chance, and the role of support systems, psychological, legal, communal, for survivors. The lesson for America today is safety is not a given. It is built from personal preparation, community warning systems, and a strong justice system to protect the most vulnerable. If you found Anne's story offers important perspectives on personal safety and the power of resilience, please hit subscribe so you don't miss the next cautionary tales. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video with more meaningful stories of survival and justice.